Hi, I'm Richard Morais, Senior Minister at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center, and I want to thank you for visiting our website and for tuning in to today's message. If you feel inspired by today's talk, I really encourage you to make a donation by hitting that button below and making a contribution to this ministry. It'll allow us to continue these messages online and to do the great work we do here at Unity of Phoenix, which is to inspire people to live better lives. So thanks for tuning in, thanks for your support, and we hope to see you at a Sunday real soon.
So there was a little boy, and his name was Johnny, and he was about 8 years old, and he came running home from school one day. Mom, it's the best thing in the world. It's finally happened. And she said, what is it, little Johnny? And he said, it's Little League Baseball. I've got an application for Little League Baseball. And Mom goes, oh, that's great, little Johnny. Unfortunately, little Johnny was born with a club foot, and he's had a couple of surgeries, but he doesn't run very fast yet. But his mom was really cool about it. She said, let me help you fill out that application. Let's sit down and do it. And so they're filling it out, and Johnny goes, Mom, it's going to be so cool. When I get up to bat, I'm going to hit that ball so hard, it's going to go completely out of the park. And all I have to do is walk around the bases. And I hope that's what your life's work is like, that you just get to walk around the bases every time you hit a home run. So this morning I have some questions for you. Now, you probably thought that since I'm the minister, I'm going to give you the answers. That's not how we're going to work this morning. Have you ever wondered if you're in the right place at the right time? Pretty much I know if I'm in the right place because things go pretty well. When I'm in the wrong place, I know that pretty much too. Are you just passing time right now until something more important comes along? Or are you looking for that next perfect thing that you're called to do? Is Spirit guiding you to your greater good? Are you listening? I know a lot of you are because you tell me that. Or you're just going about your day in the same old way that you've always done, doing everything the same boring way. Wouldn't it be great to have a job and make it feel like it was play? I think that'd be fabulous. And wouldn't it even be better if you got really well paid for playing? That's what I want in my life. This morning my talk is entitled, We Are Called. It's based on the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Many people are called to the Lord's work, but not everyone shows up at the same time. This is a parable that Jesus used to teach his disciples and all the people who listened to him about service and about constantly saying yes to God. This morning, we're going to explore the deeper metaphysical meanings of this story. So think about the work that you've done in your life. Now, some of you may still be working and some of you may be retired. So if you're retired, think about how you spend your time. Are you creating value in the time that you have? Are you fulfilled because you're using your gifts and your skills and your talents? Are you serving others? Are you doing good in the world? A whole lot of people in this congregation are doing good in this world. Are you contributing, or are you just working for the money, just working for the man? Now, this story comes from the Bible, which is one of many sacred religious texts. And some of you may have a gut reaction against the Bible. Maybe it's been used against you to tell you that you're a sinner or that you're an evil person. So let go of that. That's not what we're doing today. When I was 16, I decided I was going to read the Bible from cover to cover. And I got about halfway into Genesis, and I realized there are two creation stories. They both can't be right. So I went and talked to the youth minister, and he said, yeah, I know, Lori, it's really contradictory, things conflict, but just try to get the meaning you can out of it. I gave up, put it away. And then I discovered unity, and I discovered metaphysical Bible interpretation. Now, metaphysical is a Greek word. Meta means away from the physical, that literal surface definition that everybody gets, but that's not enough. There's more if you go deeper. There are layers of meaning. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, wrote two books, one called the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which has names and places from the ancient texts and definitions, and the other is Revealing Word, which has words in it. And these words can help you get the better meaning out of the story itself. So this morning, we're going to recognize that there's some of us in each character in the Bible, and that each character is deeper than is on the surface. So are you willing to suspend your disbelief? You know how when they do one of those action films, it looks big and giant on the screen, but actually they're filming these tiny little models of things that they blow up. So suspend your disbelief in the Bible. Are you willing to let go and have a new interpretation? This comes from Matthew chapter 20, verse 1 through 16. Matthew was actually not put onto paper or sheepskin or whatever it was written on until 80 or 90 in the Common Era. That was a long time after Jesus was gone. And it was written after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that the Romans destroyed. They came in, they took the tabernacle, which was the Holy of Holies. It was the place where they believed God actually lived. And the Romans took the tabernacle and they dragged it all the way back to Rome. They desecrated it. And for the Jewish people, this was a moment in history that was defining. It changed everything. Much like the attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11 changed us. It'll never be the same. This was a defining moment. It began the diaspora. The Jewish people moved out of Jerusalem and Palestine into the rest of the world. The temple had been the central point of worship, and without the temple, they were bereft. They didn't know who they were anymore. There was no place to do sacrifices or get atonement for your sins. So Matthew was written for after the temple was destroyed, and it was written for Jews, for non-Jews, for Romans, and for Greeks, for all of the people who had heard Jesus' stories to keep these teachings alive so they wouldn't be lost. And of course, the parables are very cryptic. They have a hidden underlying meaning. And the disciples knew the meaning, and they could impart it to people who had ears to listen. And some people weren't ready for it yet. You know how they say that when you need to learn something, the teacher will come? Well, in Unity, we believe that the Bible is about our unfolding consciousness into a higher consciousness. Jesus uses a lot of ideas that focus on an agrarian lifestyle because everybody would have a little patch where they would grow vegetables and things. And so you'll see examples in his what he said about different kinds of plants. And this one is a vineyard. And a vineyard is a really common motif in all kinds of ancient literature. It means life. So the story goes this way. Matthew 20, verse 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. The kingdom of heaven is a consciousness that we have when we're completely in line with God. Body, mind, spirit. We're so in tune that when Spirit speaks, we know immediately and we act on it. That we are living this life of peace and joy and love and abundance every single moment of every single day. It's a consciousness where we're in complete harmony with divine mind. The vineyard represents a symbol of life and growth and fertility. It represents when we are firmly planted in God's perfection and we can live out that perfection in our own lives. We know that any plant, the vines in this case, when they're planted in good soil, when they're pruned at the right time and when they're given the right amount of water and the right amount of fertilizers, they thrive, right? And that's true for our own vineyard consciousness. When we feed our bodies correctly and when we do meditation and prayer and we eat what we're supposed to and we don't let ourselves have any negative thoughts, that we can grow and flourish. Now, it says that he went out in the early morning to hire laborers. In the Roman system of time, the early morning was 6 a.m. So he goes out first thing in the morning, and property owners would have owned the best property, and they would lease it to tenant farmers. And the tenant farmers would grow whatever they wanted on it. And then when what they grew was ripe, the agreement was you use the land, you grow what you want, and then you give 10% back to the landowner as a tithe, and it's the first and the best. That's what a real tithe is, when you give the first and the best. So see, this is a story about prosperity. And so the landowner would probably keep the best of the farmland for himself, and he would have servants and slaves to do all of the daily work. Now, a slave in this time is not what we think of when we think of a slave. A slave would be someone who had gotten in debt or had to pay something off, and they would go to the landowner and they say, I owe this amount of money. How long can I work for you to pay my debt off for me? And you were not allowed to be kept in slavery longer than 7 years. After that, you were manumitted. So it's a totally different thing than what we think of when we say slavery. So the landowner would need to hire people to come when the harvest was in because they wouldn't have enough manpower in their regular household. Now, all the grapes aren't going to ripen at the same time, so there'll be a span of time that he'll need all these people. So all of the tenant farmers who were available to work would go to the village square, and they'd stand around waiting to be hired by the landowner, kind of like a manpower office or, Kelly's services. And the ones who didn't get hired would move on to the next town in the hopes of getting hired. A hireling is a state of mind in which we're always looking for rewards. It's a mercenary, someone who is just doing a job for the money. And that cultivates selfishness, and then pretty soon you start to live in fear. Now, a mercenary is like a soldier who's hired to fight in a war that they don't even care about which side they fight on. They just want to get paid for fighting. They're not really invested in one side or the other. They're just there for the paycheck. They show up, they do their job, and then they go home. There's no real investment in the outcome. Have you ever worked like that as a mercenary? I had a job once that I went to for the paycheck, and it was not pretty. It was a terrible job. It's the worst job I ever had. And I realized I was going to have to do something differently, that I just couldn't work for a paycheck anymore, that I had to be invested in what I was giving my lifetime to. So I don't know why these people were there at 6 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they were the ones with the type A personalities, the go-getters. Maybe they really, 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 really needed the money. Maybe they were fortunate enough to have their wives at home tending the garden so they could go out and bring in a little extra income for their family. Maybe they were unemployed. I don't know. But during the peak time of the harvest, the landowner would need lots of extra hands. So the landowner agrees with the laborers for the usual daily wage and sends them out to his vineyard. The standard daily wage would be 1 denarius. That's the smallest Roman coin. It's worth about maybe a penny. And it's enough for a family of 4 to subsist for 1 day. It's like minimum wage. And there was an agreement now on what I'm going to pay you and what you can expect to be paid. I will pay you the usual daily wage. Have you ever been paid minimum wage? It's hard to live on minimum wage, isn't it? You give the same amount of work. So he goes out at 9 o'clock. He sees others standing idle in the marketplace, and he says to them, you go to the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right. So the ones at 6, he's paying the usual daily wage, and the ones at 9, he's paying what's right. Okay, sounds fair, right? It was customary to pay the workers at the end of the day with cash. There was no ADP payroll system back then. You know how you get those fake paychecks that they automatically deposit into your account? It's a cool thing, really. So imagine if you were in the marketplace and no landowners showed up and you didn't get a job that day and you had to go home and your family didn't have anything to eat. Now, I hope none of you have ever been hungry. I've been fortunate in my life. I've never missed a meal. But some people are hungry. We know there are lots of people who are hungry. So the landowner, again, goes out at noon, and he goes out at 3 o'clock to hire these people. He even goes out at 5 o'clock. And when he sees these people standing around, he says, why are you standing idle all day? They said, because no one's hired us. He says, go to the vineyard. 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The grapes must be really ripe. And imagine those 5 o'clock people are only going to work a couple of hours before it gets dark. He must have really, really, really needed the help. But notice that he doesn't give up. The landowner doesn't give up. I don't know where these people were earlier. Maybe their wife had been sick all night and the kids had been sick and they'd been up helping. I don't know, maybe they'd been up all night, shooting dice and drinking palm wine and couldn't get out of bed. I don't know, maybe they were working on another farm and they'd already made the daily wage and they just wanted a little more money. So the metaphysical definition of work is to express your innate inner being, those gifts and talents that are uniquely yours, that only you can give to the world. That's your best work. We're here to give of the best of us. We're here to use the gifts and talents that we have to make our lives better and make the world a better place, to be a contribution. So who does the landowner represent? Nobody has a guess. Okay, I'll ask you again. So the landowner represents us and represents God, and that God is always calling us back into the kingdom of heaven, into the vineyard, even when we've strayed, even when we've separated ourselves from God, even when we've forgotten. God hasn't forgotten us. God is always calling us back. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." Okay, this is the first clue to the surprise ending, that Jesus always had a surprise ending in his parables. Because it was customary to pay the ones who had worked the longest first. That's not what he's doing. He's going to pay the last first. So right away, this brings the listener into the story. You start to wonder, why is he doing that? You start to pay closer attention. Jesus' stories always had this little twist to make us wonder. When those who were hired at 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage, that 1 denarius. Imagine the murmur going through the crowd as Jesus is telling this story. First, those who got their last got paid first, and then they got the usual daily pay. The listeners would now try to second guess, where's this story going? What's going to happen next? It brings up ideas of social justice, of what's fair and what's not fair, of what's right and what's wrong. And the audience will wonder why in the world those people who hadn't worked very long got paid the usual daily rate. After all, the workers who'd been there the longest had been working out in the hot sun all day long. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to those of us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching sun." Isn't that always the way? It's not fair, right? I can remember being a little girl, "Daddy, it's not fair." And he said, "Lori, I'd never tell you life was fair," right? Somebody gets something good, and what do? We get jealous and we complain. Our next door neighbor gets a new BMW, and we want a BMW. Our aunt goes to Hawaii for a trip, and we want to go to Hawaii, right? But giving the two groups, the early comers and the late ones, the same pay forces the listener into the story, forces us to wonder, what is fair? What is justice? Why in the world would a businessman pay someone who only worked a couple hours the same thing as someone who worked all day long? What kind of deals do we make in our life, with our life energy, with what we're willing to give our time and our talent to? What deals do we make? Both in our working world, in our relationships. Are we mercenaries? Are we just showing up for a paycheck? Or are we doing the work that we love? There's a book called Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. I would love for everyone in the world to live by that. Do what you love and the money will follow. So the landowner replies to them, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual wage?" And they did. "Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same that I give to you. Or are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Now, the natural response of the listener shows what's in the listener's heart. If you thought it was unfair, then that's what's in your heart. Can we rejoice when someone gets paid for a full day's work, even if they didn't work all day? I don't know. Can you? Do we judge people on what they deserve or what they don't deserve? We do that to ourselves. Do we complain and grumble when things don't go our way? No one received less than was expected. The landowner had a right to be generous if he wanted to. So I ask you again, who does the landowner represent? God. Because the kingdom is like when we have our consciousness fully in the mind of God, when we are at one with Spirit every single moment of every single day, we'll be living in vineyard consciousness in the kingdom of heaven. Everything will go right all of the time. And we will reap abundant spiritual rewards that God has for each and every one of us. It's our divine birthright. And the good news is there's grace. Every time you step one step backward, grace is always pushing you 2 steps forward. So it doesn't matter whether you come to the vineyard early or late. What matters is that you come to the vineyard and you plant your consciousness fully in the kingdom of heaven. And when you do, your life will be filled with peace and love and joy and prosperity, and you will be the happiest person on the planet. Namaste.